The United States Army is the main branch of the United States Armed Forces responsible for land-based military operations. It is the largest and oldest established branch of the U.S. military, and is one of 7 U.S. uniformed services. The modern Army has its roots in the Continental Army, which was formed on June 14, 1775, to meet the demands of the American Revolutionary War before the establishment of the United States. The Congress of the Confederation officially created the United States Army on June 3, 1784, after the end of the Revolutionary War, to replace the disbanded Continental Army. The Army considers itself to be descended from the Continental Army and thus dates its inception from the origins of that force. The primary mission of the Army is to fight and win our national Euro-unregistered trademark wars by providing prompt, sustained land dominance across the full range of military operations and spectrum of conflict in support of combatant commanders. The Army is a military service within the Department of the Army, one of the 3 military departments of the Department of Defense. The Army is headed by the Secretary of the Army, and the top military officer in the department is the Chief of Staff of the Army. The highest-ranking Army officer is currently the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. During fiscal year 2011, the regular Army reported a strength of 546,057 soldiers. The Army National Guard reported 358,078 and the United States Army Reserve reported 201,166, putting the combined component strength total at 1,105,301 soldiers. Mission: the United States Army serves as the land-based branch of the U.S. Armed Forces. Section 3062 of Title 10 U.S. Code defines the purpose of the Army as preserving the peace and security and providing for the defense of the United States, the Commonwealths and possessions and any areas occupied by the United States, supporting the national policies, implementing the national objectives, overcoming any nations responsible for aggressive acts that imperil the peace and security of the United States. History. Origins. The Continental Army was created on June 14, 1775 by the Continental Congress as a unified army for the colonies to fight Great Britain, with George Washington appointed as its commander. The army was initially led by men who had served in the British Army or colonial militias and who brought much of British military heritage with them. As the Revolutionary War progressed, French aid, resources, and military thinking influenced the new army. A number of European soldiers came on their own to help, such as Friedrich Wilhelm von Steuben, who taught the army Prussian tactics and organizational skills. The army fought numerous pitched battles and in the south 1780–81 sometimes used the Fabian strategy and hit-and-run tactics, hitting where the enemy was weakest, to wear down the British forces. Washington led victories against the British at Trenton and Princeton, but lost a series of battles around New York City in 1776 and Philadelphia in 1777. With a decisive victory at Yorktown, and the help of the French, the Continental Army prevailed against the British. After the war, though, the Continental Army was quickly given land certificates and disbanded, in a reflection of the Republican distrust of standing armies. State militias became the new nation's sole ground army, with the exception of a regiment to guard the western frontier and one battery of artillery guarding West Point's arsenal. However, because of continuing conflict with Native Americans, it was soon realized that it was necessary to field a trained standing army. The regular army was at first very small, and after General St. Clair's defeat at the Battle of the Wabash, the regular army was reorganized as the Legion of the United States, which was established in 1791 and renamed the United States Army in 1796. 19th century. The War of 1812, the third and last American war against Britain, was less successful than the Revolution and Northwest Indian War had been, though it ended on a high note for Americans also. After the capture of the British squadron on Lake Erie in 1813, the Americans were able to seize parts of western Upper Canada, burn York and defeat Tecumseh, which caused his Indian Confederacy to collapse. Following ending victories in the province of Upper Canada, which dubbed the U.S. Army Regulars, by God, British troops were able to capture and burn Washington, which had been abandoned by the military and government officials. The regular army, however, proved they were professional and capable of defeating the British Army during the invasions of Plattsburgh and Baltimore, prompting British agreement on the previously rejected terms of a status quo ante bellum, and the relatively small U.S. Navy, often attached with Marines, earned most of the victory against the Royal Navy and Marines at sea. 2 weeks after a treaty was signed, Andrew Jackson defeated the British in the Battle of New Orleans and became a national hero. Per the treaty, both sides returned to the status quo with no victor. The Army's major campaign against the Indians was fought in Florida against Seminoles. It took long wars to finally defeat the Seminoles and move them to Oklahoma. The usual strategy in Indian wars was to seize control of the Indians' winter food supply, but that was no use in Florida where there was no winter. The second strategy was to form alliances with other Indian tribes, but the two was useless because the Seminoles had destroyed all the other Indians when they entered Florida in the late 18th century. The U.S. Army fought and won the Mexico-Euro-American War, which was a defining event for both countries. The U.S. victory resulted in acquisition of territory that eventually became all or parts of the states of California, Nevada, Utah, Colorado, Arizona, Wyoming and New Mexico. The Civil War was the most costly war for the U.S. in terms of casualties. After most states in the South seceded to form the Confederate States of America, CSA troops opened fire on the Union-held Fort Sumter in Charleston, South Carolina, starting the war. Forces loyal to the United States were commonly called the Union Army during that war. For the first 2 years, Confederate forces solidly defeated the U.S. Army, with a few exceptions. The Confederates had the advantage of defending a very large country in an area where disease caused twice as many deaths as combat. The Union pursued a strategy of seizing the coastline, blockading the ports, and taking control of the river systems. By 1863 the Confederacy was being strangled. Its eastern armies did very well in combat, but the western armies were defeated one after another until New Orleans was lost in 1862 along with the Tennessee River. The Mississippi River was lost in 1863, and Atlanta fell in 1864. Grant took command of Union forces in 1864 and after a series of battles with very heavy casualties, he had Lee under siege in Richmond. Lee lost his Confederate capital in April 1865 and was captured at Appomattox Courthouse. The other Confederate armies quickly surrendered. The war remains the deadliest conflict in American history, resulting in the deaths of 620,000 soldiers. Based on 1860 census figures, 8% of all white males aged 13 to 43 died in the war, including 6% in the North and 18% in the South. Following the Civil War, the U.S. Army fought a long battle against several Western tribes of Native Americans. By the 1890s the U.S. saw itself as a potential international player. U.S. victories in the Spanish-Euro-American War and a controversial and less well-known Philippine-Euro-American War, as well as U.S. intervention in Latin America and the Boxer Rebellion, gained America more land and power. 20th century. Starting in 1910, the Army began acquiring fixed-wing aircraft. In 1910, Mexico was having a civil war, peasant rebels fighting government soldiers. The Army was deployed to American towns near the border to ensure safety to lives and property. In 1916, Pancho Villa, a major rebel leader, attacked Columbus, New Mexico, prompting a U.S. intervention in Mexico until February 7, 1917. They fought the rebels and the Mexican federal troops until 1918. The United States joined World War I in 1917 on the side of Britain, France, Russia, Italy and other allies. U.S. troops were sent to the front and were involved in the push that finally broke through the German lines. With the armistice in November 1918, the Army once again decreased its forces. The U.S. joined World War II after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. On the European front, U.S. Army troops formed a significant portion of the forces that captured North Africa and Sicily. On D-Day and in the subsequent liberation of Europe and defeat of Nazi Germany, millions of U.S. Army troops played a central role. In the Pacific, U.S. Army soldiers participated alongside U.S. Marines in capturing the Pacific Islands from Japanese control. Following the Axis surrenders in May and August of 1945, Army troops were deployed to Japan and Germany to occupy the two defeated nations. 2 years after World War II, the Army Air Forces separated from the Army to become the United States Air Force in September 1947 after decades of attempting to separate. Also, in 1948, the Army was desegregated by order of President Harry S. Truman. The end of World War II set the stage for the East-West confrontation known as the Cold War. With the outbreak of the Korean War, concerns over the defense of Western Europe rose. 2 Corps, V and 7, were reactivated under 7th United States Army in 1950 and Americans' strength in Europe rose from 1 division to 4. Hundreds of thousands of U.S. troops remained stationed in West Germany, with others in Belgium, the Netherlands and the United Kingdom, until the 1990s in anticipation of a possible Soviet attack. During the Cold War, American troops and their allies fought Communist forces in Korea and Vietnam. The Korean War began in 1950, when the Soviets walked out of a UN security meeting, removing their possible veto. Under a United Nations umbrella, hundreds of thousands of U.S. troops fought to prevent the takeover of South Korea by North Korea, and later, to invade the northern nation. After repeated advances and retreats by both sides, and the PRC People's Volunteer Army's entry into the war, the Korean Armistice Agreement returned the peninsula to the status quo in 1953. The Vietnam War is often regarded as a low point for the Army due to the use of drafted personnel, the unpopularity of the war with the American public, and frustrating restrictions placed on the military by American political leaders. While American forces had been stationed in the Republic of Vietnam since 1959, in intelligence and advising training roles, they did not deploy in large numbers until 1965, after the Gulf of Tonkin incident. American forces effectively established and maintained control of the traditional battlefield, however they struggled to counter the guerrilla hit-and-run tactics of the Communist Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese Army. On a tactical level, American soldiers did not lose a sizable battle. During the 1960s the Department of Defense continued to scrutinize the reserve forces and to question the number of divisions and brigades as well as the redundancy of maintaining 2 reserve components, the Army National Guard and the Army Reserve. In 1967 Secretary of Defense McNamara decided that 15 combat divisions in the Army National Guard were unnecessary and cut the number to 8 divisions, but increased the number of brigades from 7 to 18. The loss of the divisions did not set well with the states. Their objections included the inadequate maneuver element mix for those that remained and the end to the practice of rotating divisional commands among the states that supported them. Under the proposal, the remaining division commanders were to reside in the state of the division base. No reduction, however, in total Army National Guard strength was to take place, which convinced the governors to accept the plan. The states reorganized their forces accordingly between December 1, 1967 and May 1, 1968. The total force policy was adopted by Chief of Staff of the Army General Croton Abrams in the aftermath of the Vietnam War and involves treating the 3 components of the Army the regular Army, the Army National Guard and the Army Reserve as a single force. Believing that no U.S. president should be able to take the United States to war without the support of the American people, General Abrams intertwined the structure of the 3 components of the Army in such a way as to make extended operations impossible, without the involvement of both the Army National Guard and the Army Reserve. The 1980s was mostly a decade of reorganization. The Army converted to an all-volunteer force with greater emphasis on training and technology. The Goldwater-Nichols Act of 1986 created unified combatant commands bringing the Army together with the other 4 military services under unified, geographically organized command structures. The Army also played a role in the invasions of Grenada in 1983 and Panama in 1989. By 1989 Germany was nearing reunification and the Cold War was coming to a close. Army leadership reacted by starting to plan for a reduction in strength. By November 1989 Pentagon briefers were laying out plans to reduce Army end strength by 23%, from 750,000 to 580,000. A number of incentives such as early retirement were used. In 1990 Iraq invaded its smaller neighbor, Kuwait, and U.S. land forces, quickly deployed to assure the protection of Saudi Arabia. In January 1991 Operation Desert Storm commenced, a U.S.-led coalition which deployed over 500,000 troops, the bulk of them from U.S. Army formations, to drive out Iraqi forces. The campaign ended in total victory, as Western coalition forces routed the Iraqi army, organized along Soviet lines, in just 100 hours. After Operation Desert Storm, the Army did not see major combat operations for the remainder of the 1990s but did participate in a number of peacekeeping activities. In 1990 the Department of Defense issued guidance for rebalancing after a review of the total force policy, but in 2004, Air War College scholars concluded the guidance would reverse the total force policy, which is an essential ingredient to the successful application of military force. 21st century. After the September 11 attacks, and as part of the global war on terror, U.S. and NATO forces invaded Afghanistan in 2001, displacing the Taliban government. The U.S. Army led the combined U.S. and Allied invasion of Afghanistan in 2001, and Iraq in 2003. In the following years the mission changed from conflict between regular militaries to counterinsurgency, resulting in the deaths of more than 4,000 U.S. service members and injuries to thousands more. 23,813 insurgents were killed in Iraq between 2003 and 2011. The lack of stability in the theater of operations has led to longer deployments for regular Army as well as reserve and guard troops. The Army's chief modernization plan was the FCS program. Many systems were cancelled and the remaining were swept into the BCT modernization program. In response to budget sequestration in 2013 the Army is planned to shrink to a size not seen since the WWII build-up. The 2015 expenditure for Army research, development and acquisition changed from $32 billion projected in 2012 for FY15, to $21 billion for FY15 expected in 2014. Organization. Army components. The task of organizing the U.S. Army commenced in 1775. In the first 100 years of its existence, the United States Army was maintained as a small peacetime force to man permanent forts and perform other non-wartime duties such as engineering and construction works. During times of war, the U.S. Army was augmented by the much larger United States Volunteers which were raised independently by various state governments. States also maintained full-time militias which could also be called into the service of the Army. By the 20th century, the U.S. Army had mobilized the U.S. Volunteers on 4 separate occasions during each of the major wars of the 19th century. During World War I, the National Army was organized to fight the conflict, replacing the concept of U.S. Volunteers. It was demobilized at the end of World War I, and was replaced by the regular Army, the Organized Reserve Corps, and the state militias. In the 1920s and 1930s, the career soldiers were known as the regular Army with the Enlisted Reserve Corps, and Officer Reserve Corps augmented to fill vacancies when needed. In 1941, the Army of the United States was founded to fight World War II. The regular Army, Army of the United States, the National Guard, and Officer Enlisted Reserve Corps existed simultaneously. After World War II, the ORC and ERC were combined into the United States Army Reserve. The Army of the United States was re-established for the Korean War and Vietnam War and was demobilized upon the suspension of the draft. Currently, the Army is divided into the regular Army, the Army Reserve, and the Army National Guard. The Army is also divided into major branches such as Air Defense Artillery, Infantry, Aviation, Signal Corps, Corps of Engineers, and Armor. Before 1903 members of the National Guard were considered state soldiers unless federalized by the President. Since the Militia Act of 1903 all National Guard soldiers have held dual status, as National Guardsmen under the authority of the governor of their state or territory and, when activated, as a reserve of the U.S. Army under the authority of the President. Since the adoption of the total force policy, in the aftermath of the Vietnam War, Reserve component soldiers have taken a more active role in U.S. military operations. For example, Reserve and Guard units took part in the Gulf War, peacekeeping in Kosovo, Afghanistan, and the 2003 invasion of Iraq. Army Commands and Army Service Component Commands. Source: U.S. Army Organization, Structure. The United States Army is made up of three components: the active component, the regular Army, and two reserve components, the Army National Guard and the Army Reserve. Both reserve components are primarily composed of part-time soldiers who train once a month, known as battle assemblies or unit training assemblies, and conduct 2 to 3 weeks of annual training each year. Both the regular Army and the Army Reserve are organized under Title 10 of the United States Code, while the National Guard is organized under Title 32. While the Army National Guard is organized, trained and equipped as a component of the U.S. Army, when it is not in federal service it is under the command of individual state and territorial governors. The District of Columbia National Guard, however, reports to the U.S. President, not the district's mayor, even when not federalized. Any or all of the National Guard can be federalized by presidential order and against the governor's wishes. The Army is led by a civilian Secretary of the Army, who has the statutory authority to conduct all the affairs of the Army under the authority, direction and control of the Secretary of Defense. The Chief of Staff of the Army, who is the highest-ranked military officer in the Army, serves as the principal military advisor and executive agent for the Secretary of the Army, that is its service chief. And as a member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, a body composed of the service chiefs from each of the 4 military services belonging to the Department of Defense who advise the President of the United States, the Secretary of Defense, and the National Security Council on operational military matters, under the guidance of the Chairman and Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. In 1986, the Goldwater-Nichols Act mandated that operational control of the services follows a chain of command from the President to the Secretary of Defense directly to the Unified Combatant Commanders, who have control of all armed forces units in their geographic or function area of responsibility. Thus, the secretaries of the military departments only have the responsibility to organize, train and equip their service components. The Army provides trained forces to the combatant commanders for use as directed by the Secretary of Defense. Through 2013, the Army is shifting to 6 geographical commands that will line up with the 6 geographical Unified Combatant Commands: United States Army Central headquartered at Shaw Air Force Base, South Carolina; United States Army North headquartered at Fort Sam Houston, Texas; United States Army South headquartered at Fort Sam Houston, Texas; United States Army Europe headquartered at Clay-Cason, Wiesbaden, Germany; United States Army Pacific headquartered at Fort Shafter, Hawaii; United States Army Africa headquartered at Vicenza, Italy. The Army is also changing its base unit from divisions to brigades. When finished, the active Army will have increased its combat brigades from 33 to 48, with similar increases in the National Guard and Reserve forces. Division lineage will be retained, but the divisional headquarters will be able to command any brigade, not just brigades that carry their divisional lineage. The central part of this plan is that each brigade will be modular, that is, all brigades of the same type will be exactly the same, and thus any brigade can be commanded by any division. There will be 3 major types of ground combat brigades. Armor brigades will have around 3,700 troops and be equivalent to a mechanized infantry or tank brigade. Stryker brigades will have around 3,900 troops and be based on the Stryker family of vehicles. Infantry brigades will have around 3,300 troops and be equivalent to a light infantry or airborne brigade. In addition, there are combat support and service support modular brigades. Combat support brigades include aviation brigades, which will come in heavy and light varieties, fires brigades, and battlefield surveillance brigades. Combat service support brigades include sustainment brigades and come in several varieties and serve the standard support role in an army. Regular combat maneuver organizations. The U.S. Army currently consists of 10 active divisions as well as several independent units. The force is in the process of contracting after several years of growth. In June 2013, the Army announced plans to downsize to 32 active combat brigade teams by 2015 to match a reduction in active duty strength to 490,000 soldiers. The Army has yet to announce cuts to its supporting structure, and many observers think the Army will eventually shrink to around 400,000 active duty troops. Within the Army National Guard and United States Army Reserve there are a further 8 divisions, over 15 maneuver brigades, additional combat support and combat service support brigades, and independent cavalry, infantry, artillery, aviation, engineer, and support battalions. The Army Reserve in particular provides virtually all psychological operations and civil affairs units. Special Operations Forces, U.S. Army Special Operations Command, personnel. These are the U.S. Army ranks authorized for use today and their equivalent NATO designations. Although no living officer currently holds the rank of General of the Army, it is still authorized by Congress for use in wartime. Commissioned officers. There are several paths to becoming a commissioned officer, including the United States Military Academy, Reserve Officers Training Corps, and Officer Candidate School. Regardless of which road an officer takes, the insignia are the same. Certain professions, including physicians, pharmacists, nurses, lawyers, and chaplains are commissioned directly into the Army and are designated by insignia unique to their staff community. Most Army commissioned officers are promoted based on an up or out system. The Defense Officer Personnel Management Act of 1980 establishes rules for timing of promotions and limits the number of officers that can serve at any given time. Army regulations call for addressing all personnel with the rank of general as general regardless of the number of stars. Likewise, both colonels and lieutenant colonels are addressed as colonel and first and second lieutenants as lieutenant. Warrant officers. Warrant officers are single-track, specialty officers with subject matter expertise in a particular area. They are initially appointed as warrant officers by the Secretary of the Army, but receive their commission upon promotion to Chief Warrant Officer II. By regulation, warrant officers are addressed as Mr. or Ms. However, many personnel address warrant officers as Chief. Enlisted soldiers say sir, or ma'am, when addressing them. Enlisted personnel. Sergeants and corporals are referred to as NCOs, short for non-commissioned officers. This distinguishes corporals from the more numerous specialists, who have the same pay grade but do not exercise leadership responsibilities. Privates and privates first class are addressed as private, specialists as specialist, corporals as corporal, and sergeants, staff sergeants, sergeants first class, and master sergeants all as sergeant. First sergeants are addressed as first sergeant and sergeants major as sergeant major. Training. Training in the United States Army is generally divided into 2 categories: individual and collective. Basic training consists of 10 weeks for most recruits, followed by AIT where they receive training for their MOS. While the length of AIT school varies by the MOS, some individuals' MOSs range anywhere from 14 to 20 weeks of one station unit training, which combines basic training and AIT. The length of time spent in AIT depends on the MOS of the soldier, and some highly technical MOS training may require many months. Depending on the needs of the Army, basic combat training for combat arms soldiers is conducted at a number of locations, but 2 of the longest running are the Armor School and the Infantry School, both at Fort Benning, Georgia. Following their basic and advanced training, soldiers may choose to continue their training and apply for an ASI, which stands for Additional Skill Identifier. The ASI allows the Army to take a wide-ranging MOS and focus it into a more specific MOS. For example, a combat medic, whose duties are to provide pre-hospital emergency treatment, may receive ASI training to become a cardiovascular specialist, a dialysis specialist, or even a licensed practical nurse. For commissioned officers, ASI training includes pre-commissioning training either at USMA, via ROTC, or by completing OCS. After commissioning, officers undergo branch-specific training at the Basic Officer Leaders course, which varies in time and location according their future assignments. Further career development is available through the Army Correspondence Course Program. Collective training takes place at the unit's assigned station, but the most intensive is conducted at the 3 combat training centers. The National Training Center at Fort Irwin, California, the Joint Readiness Training Center at Fort Polk, Louisiana, and the Joint Multinational Training Center at the Hohenfels Training Area in Hohenfels, Germany. ARFORGEN is the Army Force Generation process approved in 2006 to meet the need to continuous replenish forces for deployment, at unit level, and for other echelons as required by the mission. Equipment. Weapons. Individual weapons. The Army employs various individual weapons to provide light firepower at short ranges. The most common weapons used by the Army are the compact variant of the M16 rifle, the M4 carbine, as well as the 7.62x51 variant of the FN SCAR for Army Rangers. The primary sidearm in the U.S. Army is the 9mm M9 pistol. Many units are supplemented with a variety of specialized weapons, including the M249 SAW, to provide suppressive fire at the fire team level. Indirect fire is provided by the M203 grenade launcher. The M1014 Joint Service Combat Shotgun or the Mossberg 590 shotgun are used for door breaching and close quarters combat. The M14 EBR is used by long-range marksmen, and the M107 long-range sniper rifle, the M24 sniper weapon system, and the M110 semi-automatic sniper rifle are used by snipers. Hand grenades, such as the M67 fragmentation grenade and M18 smoke grenade, are also used. Crew-served weapons. The Army employs various crew-served weapons to provide heavy firepower at ranges exceeding that of individual weapons. The M240 is the U.S. Army's standard medium machine gun. The M2 heavy machine gun is generally used as a vehicle-mounted machine gun. In the same way, the 40mm K19 grenade machine gun is mainly used by motorized units. The U.S. Army uses 3 types of mortar for indirect fire support when heavier artillery may not be appropriate or available. The smallest of these is the 60mm M224, normally assigned at the infantry company level. At the next higher echelon, infantry battalions are typically supported by a section of 81mm M252 mortars. The largest mortar in the Army's inventory is the 120mm M120 per meter 121, usually employed by mechanized units. Fire support for light infantry units is provided by turret howitzers, including the 105mm M119A1 and the 155mm M777. The U.S. Army utilizes a variety of direct-fire rockets and missiles to provide infantry with an anti-armor capability. The AT-4 is an unguided projectile that can destroy armor and bunkers at ranges up to 500 meters. The FIM-92 Stinger is a shoulder-launched, heat-seeking anti-aircraft missile. The FGM-148 Javelin and BGM-71 TOW are anti-tank guided missiles. Vehicles. The Army's most common vehicle is the high-mobility multi-purpose wheeled vehicle, commonly called the Humvee, which is capable of serving as a cargo troop carrier, weapons platform, and ambulance, among many other roles. While they operate a wide variety of combat support vehicles, one of the most common types centers on the family of HEMTT vehicles. The M1A2 Abrams is the Army's main battle tank, while the M2A3 Bradley is the standard infantry fighting vehicle. Other vehicles include the Stryker, and the M113 armored personnel carrier, and multiple types of mine-resistant ambush-protected vehicles. The Pentagon bought 25,000 MRAP vehicles since 2007 in 25 variants through rapid acquisition with no long-term plans for the platforms. The Army plans to divest 7,456 vehicles and retain 8,585. Of the total number of vehicles the Army will keep, 5,036 will be put in storage, 1,073 will be used for training, and the remaining will be spread across the active force. The Oshkosh MATV will be kept the most at 5,681 vehicles, as it is smaller and lighter than other MRAPs for off-road mobility. The other most retained vehicle will be the Navistar Morksh Pro Dash with 2,633 vehicles, plus 301 Mercs Pro ambulances. Thousands of other MRAPs like the Cougar, BAE Cayman, and larger Morksh Pros will be disposed of. The U.S. Army's principal artillery weapons are the M109A6 Paladin self-propelled howitzer and the M270 multiple launch rocket system, both mounted on tracked platforms and assigned to heavy mechanized units. While the U.S. Army operates a few fixed-wing aircraft, it mainly operates several types of rotary-wing aircraft. These include the AH-64 Apache attack helicopter, the OH-58D Kiowa Warrior armed reconnaissance light attack helicopter, the UH-60 Black Hawk utility tactical transport helicopter, and the CH-47 Chinook heavy lift transport helicopter. Fixed-wing aircraft used by the U.S. Army often on frontline combat and light transport roles. The Army relies on the United States Air Force for airlift capabilities. Uniforms. The Army Combat Uniform, or ACU, currently features a digital universal camouflage pattern and is designed for use in woodland, desert, and urban environments. However, soldiers operating in Afghanistan are being issued a fire-resistant ACU with the multi-cam pattern, officially known as Operation Enduring Freedom Camouflage Pattern or OCP. The standard garrison service uniform is known as Army Greens or Classes and has been worn by all officers and enlisted personnel since its introduction in 1956 when it replaced earlier olive drab and khaki uniforms worn between the 1950s and 1985. The Army Blue uniform, dating back to the mid-19th century, is currently the Army's formal dress uniform, but in 2013, it replaced the Army Green, and in 2014 it will replace the Army White uniform and will become the new Army Service uniform, which will function as both a garrison uniform and a dress uniform. Berets. The Army Black Beret is no longer worn with a new ACU for garrison duty. After years of complaints that it wasn't suited well for most work conditions, Army Chief of Staff General Martin Dempsey eliminated it for wear with the ACU in June 2011. Soldiers may still wear colored berets who are currently in an airborne unit, Rangers, and Special Forces and may wear it with the Army Service uniform for non-ceremonial functions. Unit commanders may still direct the wear of patrol caps in these units in training environments or motor pools. Tents. The Army has relied heavily on tents to provide the various facilities needed while on deployment. The most common tent uses for the military are as temporary barracks, DFAC buildings, forward operating bases, after-action review, tactical operations center, morale, welfare, and recreation facilities, and security checkpoints. Furthermore, most of these tents are set up and operated through the support of NITIC Soldier Systems Center. The U.S. military is beginning to use a more modern tent called the Deployable Rapid Assembly Shelter or DRASH. In 2008, DRASH became part of the Army's standard integrated command post system. 3D printing. In November 2012 the United States Army developed a tactical 3D printing capability to allow it to rapidly manufacture critical components on the battlefield. Branch establishment. The U.S. Army was officially founded on June 14, 1775, when the Continental Congress authorized enlistment of riflemen to serve the United Colonies for 1 year. Each branch of the Army has a different branch insignia. Maneuver, Fires, and Effects branches. Maneuver, Infantry. June 14, 1775, 10 companies of riflemen were authorized by a resolution of the Continental Congress on June 14, 1775. However, the oldest regular Army infantry regiment, the 3rd Infantry Regiment, was constituted on June 3, 1784, as the first American regiment. Armor. June 12, 1776, the Armor branch traces its origin to the cavalry. A regiment of cavalry was authorized to be raised by the Continental Congress resolve of December 12, 1776. Although mounted units were raised at various times after the Revolution, the first in continuous service was the United States Regiment of Dragoons, organized in 1833. The tank service was formed on March 5, 1918. The Armored Force was formed on July 10, 1940. Armor became a permanent branch of the Army in 1950. Aviation. April 12, 1983, following the establishment of the U.S. Air Force as a separate service in 1947, the Army began to develop further its own aviation assets and support of ground operations. The Korean War gave this drive impetus, and the war in Vietnam saw its fruition, as Army aviation units performed a variety of missions, including reconnaissance, transport, and fire support. After the war in Vietnam, the role of armed helicopters as tank destroyers received new emphasis. In recognition of the growing importance of aviation in Army doctrine and operations, aviation became a separate branch on April 12, 1983. Maneuver Support, Corps of Engineers, June 16, 1775, Continental Congress Authority for a Chief Engineer for the Army dates from June 16, 1775. A Corps of Engineers for the United States was authorized by the Congress on March 11, 1789. The Corps of Engineers as it is known today came into being on March 16, 1802, when the President was authorized to organize and establish a Corps of Engineers. That the said Corps shall be stationed at West Point in the state of New York and shall constitute a military academy. A Corps of Topographical Engineers, authorized on July 4, 1838, was merged with a Corps of Engineers on March 1863. Chemical Corps, June 28, 1918. The Chemical Warfare Service was established on June 28, 1918, combining activities that until then had been dispersed among 5 separate agencies of government. It was made a permanent branch of the regular Army by the National Defense Act of 1920. In 1945, it was redesignated the Chemical Corps. Military Police Corps, September 26, 1941, a Provost Marshal General's Office and Corps of Military Police were established in 1941. Prior to that time, except during the Civil War and World War I, there was no regularly appointed Provost Marshal General or regularly constituted Military Police Corps, although a Provost Marshal can be found as early as January 1776, and a Provost Corps as early as 1778. Artillery, Field Artillery, November 17, 1775, the Continental Congress unanimously elected Henry Knox Colonel of the Regiment of Artillery on November 17, 1775. The regiment formally entered service on January 1, 1776. Air Defense Artillery, June 20, 1968. The Air Defense Artillery branch descended from the anti-aircraft artillery into a separate branch on June 20, 1968. Special Operations Forces, Special Forces, April 9, 1987. The first Special Forces unit in the Army was formed on June 11, 1952, when the 10th Special Forces Group was activated at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. A major expansion of Special Forces occurred during the 1960s, with a total of 18 groups organized in the regular Army, Army Reserve, and Army National Guard. As a result of renewed emphasis on special operations in the 1980s, the Special Forces branch was established as a basic branch of the Army effective April 9, 1987, by General Order No. 35, June 19, 1987. Special Forces are part of U.S. Special Operations Forces, Civil Affairs Corps, October 16, 2006. The Civil Affairs Military Government Branch in the Army Reserve Branch was established as a special branch on August 17, 1955. Subsequently redesignated the Civil Affairs Branch on October 2, 1955. It has continued its mission to provide guidance to commanders in a broad spectrum of activities ranging from host-guest relationships to the assumption of executive, legislative, and judicial processes in occupied or liberated areas. Became a basic branch effective October 16, 2006 per General Order 29, on January 12, 2007. Psychological Operations, October 16, 2006, established as a basic branch effective October 16, 2006 per General Order 30, January 12, 2007. Functional Areas, FA 30 Information Operations, FA 46 Public Affairs, Operations Support Branches, Signal Corps, June 21, 1860. The Signal Corps was authorized as a separate branch of the Army by Act of Congress on March 3, 1863. However, the Signal Corps dates its existence from June 21, 1860, when Congress authorized the appointment of one signal officer in the Army, and a War Department order carried the following assignment: Signal Department Assistant Surgeon Albert J. Meyer to be Signal Officer, with the rank of Major, June 27, 1860, to fill an original vacancy. FA-24 Telecom Systems Engineer, FA-53 Info Systems Management, Military Intelligence Corps, July 1, 1962. Intelligence has been an essential element of Army operations during war as well as during periods of peace. In the past, requirements were met by personnel from the Army Intelligence and Army Security Reserve branches, 2-year obligated tour officers, 1 tour levies on the various branches, and regular Army officers in the specialization programs. To meet the Army's increased requirement for national and tactical intelligence, an Intelligence and Security Branch was established effective July 1, 1962, by General Order No. 38, on July 3, 1962. On July 1, 1967, the branch was redesignated as Military Intelligence. FA-34 Strategic Intel, Foreign Area Officer, FA-48 Foreign Area Officer, Functional Areas, FA-29 Electronic Warfare, FA-40 Space Ops, FA-47 Academy Professor, FA-49 Ops Research and Systems Analysis, FA-50 Force Management, FA-52 Nuclear and Counter-Proliferation, FA-57 Simulation Ops, FA-59 Strategist, Force Sustainment Branches, Logistics, Quartermaster Corps, June 16, 1775, the Quartermaster Corps, originally designated the Quartermaster Department, was established on June 16, 1775. While numerous additions, deletions, and changes of function have occurred, its basic supply and service support functions have continued in existence. Ordnance Corps, May 14, 1812. The Ordnance Department was established by Act of Congress on May 14, 1812. During the Revolutionary War, ordnance material was under supervision of the Board of War and Ordnance. Numerous shifts in duties and responsibilities have occurred in the Ordnance Corps since colonial times. It acquired its present designation in 1950. Ordnance soldiers and officers provide maintenance and ammunition support. Transportation Corps, July 31, 1942. The history of the Transportation Corps starts with World War I. Prior to that time, transportation operations were chiefly the responsibility of the Quartermaster General. The Transportation Corps, essentially in its present form, was organized on July 31, 1942. The Transportation Corps is headquartered at Fort Lee, Virginia. Logistics, January 1, 2008, established by General Order 6, November 27, 2007. Consists of multifunctional logistics officers in the rank of captain and above, drawn from the Ordnance, Quartermaster and Transportation Corps. FSD Warrants, Warrant Officers, Soldier Support, Adjutant General's Corps, June 16, 1775. The post of Adjutant General was established June 16, 1775, and has been continuously in operation since that time. The Adjutant General's Department, by that name, was established by the Act of March 3, 1812, and was redesignated the Adjutant General's Corps in 1950. Finance Corps, June 16, 1775. The Finance Corps is the successor to the old Pay Department, which was created in June 1775. The Finance Department was created by law on July 1, 1920. It became the Finance Corps in 1950. Professional Service Branches, Chaplain Corps, July 29, 1775. The legal origin of the Chaplain Corps is found in a resolution of the Continental Congress, adopted July 29, 1775, which made provision for the pay of chaplains. The office of the Chief of Chaplains was created by the National Defense Act of 1920. Judge Advocate General's Corps, July 29, 1775. The office of Judge Advocate of the Army may be deemed to have been created on July 29, 1775, and has generally paralleled the origin and development of the American system of military justice. The Judge Advocate General Department, by that name, was established in 1884. Its present designation as a corps was enacted in 1948. Acquisition, Health Services Division branches, Army Medical Department, July 27, 1775, the Army Medical Department and the Medical Corps trace their origins to July 27, 1775, when the Continental Congress established the Army Hospital headed by a Director General and Chief Physician. Congress provided a medical organization of the Army only in time of war or emergency until 1818, which marked the inception of a permanent and continuous medical department. The Army Organization Act of 1950 renamed the medical department as the Army Medical Service. In June 1968, the Army Medical Service was redesignated the Army Medical Department. The medical department has the following branches: Medical Corps, July 27, 1775, Army Nurse Corps, February 2, 1901, Dental Corps, March 3, 1911, Veterinary Corps, June 3, 1916, Medical Service Corps, June 30, 1917, Army Medical Specialist Corps, April 16, 1947. See also: America's Army, Army National Guard, Comparative Military Ranks, List of active United States military aircraft, List of former United States Army medical units, Officer Candidate School, ROTC/JROTC, Timeline of United States military operations, Transformation of the United States Army, U.S. Army Regimental System, United States Military Academy, United States Army Basic Training, United States Army Center of Military History, U.S. Soldiers' Creed, United States Volunteers, Vehicle Markings of the United States Military, Warrant Officer Candidate School, References. Further reading: Bluhm, J. R. Raymond K. Andrade, Dale. Jacobs, Bruce. Langelia, John. Newell, Clayton R. Seelinger, Matthew. U.S. Army, A Complete History. Arlington, Virginia, The Army Historical Foundation. PA 744. ISBN A978-0-88363-640-4. Kretschig, Walter E. U.S. Army Doctrine, From the American Revolution to the War on Terror, 392 pages. Studies Military Doctrine in Four Distinct Eras, 1779 Euro 1904, 1905 Euro 1944, 1944 Euro 1962, and 1962 to the present. External links: Army.mil Euro United States Army Official Website, GoArmy.com Euro Official Recruiting Site, U.S. Army Collection Euro Missouri History Museum, Finding Aids for Researching the U.S. Army, US-militaria.com Euro The U.S. Army during the Second World War. This article incorporates a public domain material from the United States Army Center of Military History document Army Birthdays.